Bashar Saleh, opening statement for the defense. May it please the court. Spencer Matthew is the one who committed these crimes and must now face the time. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today in relation to a widely publicized college admissions fraud scandal. The prosecution and the defense agree on a lot of the facts. Mr. Spencer Matthew has admitted to paying top college officials. Mr. Spencer Matthew has admitted to changing test scores. Mr. Spencer Matthew has admitted to modifying resumes. What the prosecution hasn't told you, however, is that my client, Mrs. Tam, is innocent and a victim in the events that transpired. At the end of this trial, you will find that there is only one verdict which speaks the truth. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we ask you at the end of this trial to return a verdict of not guilty. You see, my client, Mrs. Tam, is being charged with honest services wire fraud. In order to convict her and charge her as guilty, you must do so beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the highest standard in our legal system. You must agree that my client, Mrs. Tam, knowingly devised or participated in a scheme to defraud of money or other property using false pretenses, representations, or promises. You must answer yes, that Mrs. Tam did act with intent to defraud. And you must conclude that Mrs. Tam used wire communications throughout this fraud. However, after examining the evidence and listening to the facts today, you will find that Ms. Tam is not guilty for honest services wire fraud. In fact, it was Mr. Spencer Matthew who committed the crimes, and now he must face the time. Mr. Spencer Matthew is the founder and president of a college consulting firm called Reach for the Stars. Mr. Spencer opened this business on his own, expanded his clients throughout the years, and has made it into the successful consulting firm it is today. However, Mr. Matthew is in the business of making money after all. In order to make sure that he stays at the top of his competition, Mr. Matthew utilized deceptive business practices to allow college students to gain admission into their dream colleges when they weren't supposed to gain those admissions. Mr. Spencer Matthew did this by falsifying documents, bribing officials, and tampering with multiple college admission materials. Mr. Spencer Matthew committed these crimes. He must now face the time. In December 2015, my client's daughter, Jewel Tam, started the process of applying to colleges. My client, Mrs. Tam, did indeed reach out to Mr. Matthew to consult with him about her daughter's chances of gaining admission into her dream college, Berkeley. It is in the weeks that followed that Mrs. Tam saw with her own eyes why Reach for the Stars is a top consulting college firm. You see, Mr. Spencer and his colleagues met with Jewel numerous occasions to tutor her. It is during one of these tutoring sessions where Mr. Matthew decided that Jewel had a learning disability and introduced her to his psychiatrist, Dr. Jibo. Dr. Jibo wrote a letter on Jewel's behalf that stated that she had a learning disability which allowed Jewel extra time on her SAT, a universally known standardized college admission test which is similar to the ACT or the SAT. Things were going great. Jewel, because of this letter and the extra time that she received, was able to gain one of the highest scores on the SAT. However, it is what Miss Tam did not see which led to her being charged with honest services wire fraud. Behind her back, Spencer Matthew committed these crimes, and he must now face the time. Behind her back, Mr. Spencer Matthew had been the puppeteer controlling all of Jewel's success. Because Jewel needed extra time on her exam, her test was moved to a facility known as the Newport Beach Testing Facility. Did you know that Mr. Matthew owns this testing facility and was able to change and alter Jewel's scores without arising any suspicion? Did you know that Mr. Spencer Matthew is the one who bribed college coaches into believing that they were going to take on this high school golf star? And did you know that Mr. Matthew is the one who tampered and fiddled with Jewel's resume and her college application materials, putting lies into them and sending them off behind her back to the colleges she wanted to gain admission to? Mr. Spencer Matthew committed these crimes. It is about time he faced the time. Mr. Matthew knows that my client is a highly regarded Hollywood star. She has a huge following. In order to ensure that he gained the employment of her followers, he needed to make sure that Jewel got into Berkeley, and he spared no expense in doing so. Sure, Mrs. Tam paid Mr. Matthew $10,000 for his services. She paid $140,000 to his charity, but it's Miss Tam's money. She has a right to do with it whatever she likes. In fact, when Jewel gained admission into the University of California at Berkeley, Mrs. Tam sent Mr. Matthew $5,000 in cash and a hoodie. She was so ecstatic because her daughter got into her dream college. When Mr. Matthew was caught by the FBI for the crimes he committed, he called Mrs. Tam, and you will see this in evidence. And you will also see that Mrs. Tam had no idea what Mr. Matthew was suggesting, that he altered her test scores, because she hung up the phone immediately and said, "I don't know what this is about. Please don't contact me." It's ironic how Mr. Matthew got caught by the FBI and is now trying to bring a case with the FBI against my client, a Hollywood star. What better headline would there be? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may not realize, but after Mr. Matthew was caught by the FBI, he was sentenced to 800 years in prison. 800. And he had to pay $300 million in fees. But by cooperating with the FBI and bringing frivolous charges against my client in order to save his own behind, he brought down the 800 years in prison to 15, or 9 with good behavior. He doesn't have to pay $300 million anymore. He only has to pay 11. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will find that Miss Tam did not knowingly devise or participate in a scheme to defraud of money or other property using false pretenses, representations, or promises. You will find that Miss Tam did not act with the intent to defraud, and you will find that Miss Tam did not use wire communications in this alleged fraud. Therefore, Mrs. Tam is not guilty of honest services wire fraud. It was Mr. Matthew who committed these crimes, and it is Mr. Matthew who must now face the time. Thank you.